Okay, hi everybody. Hanukkah Sameach. Welcome back. I'm happy for anybody who takes a few moments to join us for our weekly tour through Pirkei Avot. Although Pirkei Avot this week is going to be a little bit different because it's Hanukkah. In fact, the title of the shir today is. Let me try to fix this. Excuse me. Don't need to do that. I'm still playing around and learning how to use my new tripod, so it's the differences are not that great. Okay. The topic is what's revolutionary about Hanukkah, and the truth of the matter is that even the Mishnah about Shemaim V'Avtalion has what to do with Hanukkah and with Greek wisdom and all kinds of stuff, and we will get to that. I'm going to save that for the end because Shemaim V'Avtalion lived at the end of the Maccabean rule, before just at the time that the Romans took over, and actually set up the last Hasmonean, the last descendant of Shimon HaChashmona'i, as a puppet king in Judea, from whom power was wrested by Herod, who was not a Hasmonean, although he married one, but then he murdered her, actually, he murdered her, he murdered his children. In fact, there's a famous statement attributed to Augustus that he would rather be Herod's pig than his son, because he won't eat his pig, because he was at least publicly kept kosher. But his children, he had no hesitation to attempt to execute. Okay. So let's start with what's revolutionary about Hanukkah. We started talking. I wanted to highlight some of the aspects of Hanukkah which we don't particularly pay attention to, and I think are worth paying attention to now. The first one is the actual existence of Hanukkah. We have a holiday. What's the holiday? The holiday is that we fought against the Greeks and that they wanted to destroy the Torah and all kinds of other stuff. Okay, that's true. But the question that nobody asks is, who gave the Maccabees, who gave the Hashmonaim the right to start a holiday? Think about it. Up until the beginning of Bayit Sheni, all of the holidays had been established. The last holiday to be established was Purim. But Purim, which, by the way, met with some opposition, according to the rabbis, there were those who opposed its establishment, because Purim was the first holiday to be created after since Chumash. So who you're not allowed? Who says you're allowed to make holidays? Who says you're allowed to create holidays and special days with mitzvot and rules and all kinds of stuff? Who gave the Sanhedrin the right to do that? So the rabbis pick up on the fact that that at the end of the Megillah, I know we're talking about Hanukkah, but at the end of the Megillah, the author informs us that this is the text of the second Megillah. The Esther Malka sent out a second Megillah to back up the first one. Why did they have to have a certain amount of? Why did it have to be promulgated twice? Apparently, there were serious objections. So the rabbis have one take on what the objections were. The Gemara in Megillah, Daf Gimel Amud Aleph 3a, says that somebody expressed the position that it's not nice if we have a holiday about fighting back against non-Jews. They're going to be mad and back and forth, and you have no reason, you have no basis in the Torah for doing this, and so on and so forth. So apparently there was some hesitation about creating a holiday based on its content and also based on the very idea of doing something which was unparalleled. At the end of the day, it's true that the holiday was accepted, but only because Esther, according to Chazal, Esther found some kind of a textual basis to justify doing so. And in the end, the rabbis recognized that the Megillah, that the book of Esther, actually was written Baruch HaKodesh. It has sanctity, and therefore was sanctioned by, since it has a book to back it, which was accepted, whose sanctity was accepted, so it was sort of like giving prophetic sanction to the establishment of Purim. So that's all very well and good, but according to accepted normative theology, there's no more prophecy after the 5th century BC. So there's no power on earth that would allow for a new holiday to be created. Now one could argue that Purim is a precedent, but it's not a precedent because you still had some kind of divine intervention. Now, those of you who are more learned know that Maimonides has a whole discussion about that prophecy has no place in law. Let's put that aside for right now. Okay, let's just leave the Rambam alone for a minute. The simple understanding was that once there's no more prophecy, the rabbis are hamstrung. And I mentioned this in passing when we looked at the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. When we said Moshe kibel Torah miSinai musara liYoshua v'Yoshua lizkenim u'zkenim leNeviim u'Neviim misaru la'anshe knesset hagdola. I suspect, or at least how I understand it, the use of the fact that there were more words in that Mishnah, that somehow the passing on or the passing off of the right to interpret the Torah from the prophets to the members of the Great Assembly, who were the first major institution, Torah Shel Peh, that we know about, at least we have texts about, indicates the fact that there was a fundamental watershed between those two stages, between the Nevi'im and everybody before and afterwards. Because once you get to Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, you're talking about a world in which the rabbis or whoever's in charge of interpreting and applying the Torah have to take responsibility and have to take a chance. They have to take a chance and interpret things without God telling them or a prophet telling them, you did right, you did wrong, whatever the case might be. So Hanukkah the question of establishing a holiday for in honor of the dedication of the temple arises specifically within this context, so that it's not a small business that the Chashmonaim and those who supported them supported the idea of establishing a new holiday with a mitzvah. You say a bracha, you don't say a bracha. That's not the issue. With a mitzvah, with obligations, in a prophecyless world. And we know that this bothered them because on other occasions throughout the first book of Maccabees, you have a couple of occasions where the author of Maccabees 1 says that, you do what you can, but if there are issues that you are not ready to take responsibility for or to be involved in, then you put them off until there's a new prophet arises in Israel. You find it specifically in two cases. One case is on the occasion of establishing or rededicating the temple. The author of Maccabees 1 says that aside from the question of the holiday, there were all kinds of other issues that came up, residual issues that weren't that central, and one of them was, what do you do with the? Okay, here there's some question. What do you do with the stones from the altar or from the pedestal under which whichever idol it was that they put there? What do you do with them? And there was no agreement about whether you could use them, can you redeem them, what do you do with them? So they put them aside. And the author of Maccabees 1 says, till a prophet comes in Israel, Ad sheyakum Navi B'Yisrael. Interestingly, this tradition in Maccabees 1 is confirmed by the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Masechet Midot talks about the basic outlay and function of various parts of the temple complex, and it says that in a certain part of the temple complex, I'm not going to go into all the details, but a certain part of the temple complex were stones which had been defiled by the Greeks and had been put there by the Hasmoneans, in this case, Ad she'yavo Eliyahu, till Elijah comes and tells us what to do with them. Now it's striking. So what do you derive from this? You derive from this that there were certain issues that they apparently they still felt some kind of lack of ease. They were uneasy about the certain steps that were taken, and still felt even 300 years later that the involvement or the confirmation of the opinion of a prophet was required. The same thing pops up later in one of the more controversial things that gets mentioned in the book of Maccabees, when Simon, the last of the brothers to survive, when Simon gets appointed to be the king and the high priest, a lot of people, including those who later became the rabbis, those circles were very uncomfortable with the combination of the two. And so it's interesting. There's a codicil which is put on his letter of appointment, which says that this appointment combining these two functions will be true until a true prophet arises in Israel, which I read as indicating that that we're doing something, but we're not 100% happy with this because we know it's a little bit dicey. So we're gonna make it conditional and so on. Now, the author of the one of the most contemporary commentary on Maccabees 1 that I know of, Professor Ariel Rappaport, says that this is sort of something that the frumer, the more pious elements within the population demanded because they didn't like the combination of high priest and king. That's fine, but from the point of view of a history of religion, the fact that you're still invoking the return of prophecy in 300 years after, by common assent, it had disappeared, or at least there wasn't any consensus that there were prophets. There were people running around thinking they were prophets, and there were books that were pretended to be prophetic, but they weren't. Certainly did not reflect broad consensus in the community. Shows that if I'm willing to do what I have to do, but if I don't have to take responsibility for it, I'll put it off. Against that background, the creation of a brand new holiday actually takes on added significance because they took a chance. They decided that they were so convinced that this was important to do that they went ahead and made a holiday, even though there was no prophetic confirmation. And that happens. That happens in the history of Halacha, not infrequently. That certain developments occur because those who do it are so convinced that they're right that they're willing to take the responsibility. They're willing to take a chance. One example, which pops up later, it's a 3rd century CE example, but actually has a lot of contemporary implications. Regards the central mitzvah, the other central mitzvah of Hanukkah. The other central mitzvah of Hanukkah, we know about the lights, and yes, spinj and sufganiyot and levivot are also part of the mitzvot hachag. But the real mitzvah is Hallel, as the central prayer that's added to the service. So central is Hallel to Hanukkah that the Rambam puts the rules of Hallel not in Hilchot Tefillah, but in Hilchot Hanukkah, which underscores how central it is to Hanukkah. So if I have to decide how the Rambam classifies things, tells you a lot about how he viewed the importance and the central motif and the central significance of each thing. So if Hallel, which usually would think you put in Hilchot Tefillah, which is where it appears in the Shulchan Aruch, instead puts it in Hilchot Hanukkah, tells you that Hallel, that praising God is a central motif, it's a central factor, maybe the central factor in or characteristic of the holiday. Okay, now, why am I mentioning Hallel? Because there's a debate among Rishonim as to whether you should say a bracha over a custom. In other words, when you have a mitzvah, whether it's doraita or it's rabbanan, we say a bracha. Good. What about, there's a minhag, there's an established minhag, there's a very powerful, deeply entrenched minhag. Do you make a bracha or not? Who cares? What would be the difference? The difference is very simple. In the case of women, for example, women are exempt, according to normative halacha, from time-bound mitzvah. But both Ashkenazi and Sephardi women, apparently started with Ashkenazi women, but that's not 100% clear either, started to take upon themselves time-bound mitzvahs, like Ktikat Shofar, like Netilat Lulav. In the case of Hanukkah candles doesn't apply because women were an integral part of the nes, so therefore women have to like Hanukkah. But anyways, in those cases where the women are not obliged, but they took upon themselves those mitzvot, do they make a bracha or not? So the Sephardic position, led by the Rambam, is no. If you're not, you can't say vitzivanu if you took it on of your own free will, which is wonderful, and you encourage it and so on and so forth, as the rabbis would probably go on and say in shul. But can't say vitzivanu. The Ashkenazim, from the time of Rabbeinu Tam on, in the 12th century, said no. women are allowed to say Vitzivanu, because it's a meaningful religious act for them, and therefore you can say Vitzivanu, who has commanded us. Why am I draining you a cup with this? I'm draining you a cup with this because the classic proof that is cited by Rabbeinu Tam for the veracity, for the justification of his position that you could say a bracha over a minig, and that and you could say Vitzivanu, is derived from the Gemara in Tanit. The Gemara in Tanit tells a story that Rav was mucking around. He was traveling around as he was his wont, and he got to a town on Rosh Chodesh. Now there is no mitzvah to say Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. The mitzvah to say Hallel is on Sukkot and Pesach and Shavuot and Hanukkah. That's it. If you want to say Shmini Atzeret is a separate holiday, but that's it. Saying Hallel on Rosh Hashanah is a custom. And because it's a custom, we don't say the whole Hallel. We say part of it. We skip 2 half paragraphs in order to show that it's sort of like less significant. It's not the whole deal. So Torah Koman tells the story that Hillel went to shul, and he sees that they're saying Hallel. Okay, so he joins them. It's Rosh Chodesh. And then he saw that they actually skipped those 2 paragraphs that I mentioned while they were citing Hallel. And he says, from this you see that they don't think, these people in whatever town it was, don't consider saying Hallel on Rosh Chodesh a mitzvah, on the same level as saying it on Yom Tif or on Hanukkah, but it's a minig. It's a minig, because they downgrade the Hallel by not reciting the whole thing. You see, it's only a customary practice, and therefore there's no problem with saying more Hallels than you're allowed, which is a whole other kettle of fish. So the Tosfos on the daf in Tanis, quoting Rabbeinu Tam, they don't quote Rabbeinu Tam there, but we know that it's his opinion. Say, wait a minute. If apparently these people actually said a bracha before they said Hallel, because if they didn't, and let's assume Rob went to shul on time, if they didn't, then he would have known immediately because they didn't say a bracha. Apparently then, they said a bracha over Hallel, which turns out to have been a minig. Therefore, say Tosfos, echoing Rabbeinu Tam. Therefore, you see that you could say a bracha on a minig. That's one of the great proofs central proofs that is cited. But think about it from a point of view of religious anthropology. You're talking about a bunch of people, or a tradition, that is so convinced of the legitimacy and the correctness of their position that's reciting Hallel on Rosh Chodesh is an obligation of some sort, that a minhag generates that kind of obligation, that they're willing to take a chance and say a bracha on Hallel. Now, they could get away with it like everybody else and not say a bracha. But you see the depth of their conviction that they're willing to take a chance by saying a bracha. So what kind of big chance? They said a bracha. One of the things that we've lost in modernity is the sensitivity to a lot of religious situations to which our ancestors were far more our ancestors were far more aware. So one of them is the avoidance of any possibility of taking God's name in vain. Forget that if you say a bracha, which is if you take God's name in vain in general, what do you mean in vain? In vain means for a non-justified purpose. It's a I don't know what to call it. It's not quite blasphemy. It's not really blasphemy, but it's certainly deeply inappropriate conduct, and the rabbis categorize it under the subheading of the second commandment, the third commandment rather. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. So this is serious stuff. And you're talking about people who are sensitive to these things. So the fact that these people are willing to do that shows the depth of their conviction. They make the commitment. The same thing. So that's a further expression of a motif in the history of halakha, by which you find people who are totally convinced of the justice of their cause, of their position, and they'll go ahead and take a chance. They'll endanger their souls. And I'm not being overly. I hope I'm not being overly dramatic, but people or religious people think that they have souls, and they think that if they do the wrong thing, they take God's name in vain, they're going to be punished at some point. Yes, I know. Punishment and reward are not categories which are popular in contemporary religious discourse, but it doesn't mean that a religious person shouldn't consider them as part of his calculus. So the first revolutionary aspect of Hanukkah, and I say it's already 1:21, I'm going to move fast, is the very establishment of the holiday. Now, the Maccabees then went on and made a whole bunch of other holidays, which didn't last, but that's another story. But I think when I think about the religious fortitude which is required in creating a new holiday, I also think about the commitment that was made when they tried to figure out what to do on Yom Ha'atzmaut, because it's made of the same. It's made of a similar piece. So that's number one. Revolution number two is what came before. To the best of my knowledge, and if somebody is willing to correct me, I'd be happy to be corrected. The edicts of Antiochus, whether they were invited by Jews, as some suspect, or Antiochus thought them up by himself, or came up with the idea and was guided by Hellenizing Jews in terms of their formulation, were the first real anti-religious persecution, or reverse religious persecution known to man, at least in Western history. Why that is a long story, but it's a fact. I think it's a fact. That being the case, what the challenge of the Antiochian decrees was, what happens in a situation like that? Are there cases where you choose between life and violating God's law in the most egregious ways, meaning among them being betrayal of everything the Torah stands for, which is against idolatry, not against avodah zarah. Avodah zarah means worshiping. The best definition of avodah zarah is worshiping as God someone or something which is actually not God. Underneath that definition, which is not mine, it's my friend Rabbi Professor David Berger's in New York. Under that can be categorized idols and fetishisms and all kinds of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's attributing divinity and worshiping as God someone or something which is in fact not God. Which means you can't worship celebs. You can't worship yourself either in contemporary discourse. Never mind the Kardashians and whoever else people like to worship. Anyways, do you do that? Or they say there are some circumstances in which I'd rather die, or should die. And so, in other words, the question of martyrdom came up for the first time in history at the time of Antiochus. And that was also revolutionary. Under what circumstances do you give up your life? Under what circumstances do you not give up your life? Can you proactively put yourself in danger or not? These were unparalleled questions, which continued to develop. The first reaction, to judge from Maccabees 1, the response of many Jews was to actually die for reasons that later on were not acceptable. Halakha Rabbinic tradition tried to compress or to restrict the number of cases where a person would die, because human life is not the highest Jewish value, but it's certainly up there, and it certainly mitigates many other circumstances. But it was Jews for the first time who presented the position of martyrdom, that there were circumstances under which it is more important to die for one's principles and not live a life of avodah zarah, or whatever the case may be, rather than continuing to live. That idea that there are some things worth dying for, and it's not all about me, was a game changer, not just in Judaism. It was a game changer for the rest of the world. In fact, that's the reason why, while the books of Maccabees were not accepted into the Tanakh, which is a topic for another discussion, they were preserved by the Catholic Church, or by the Church, because the Christian martyrs took their cue from the Jewish martyrs who were described in Maccabees 1 and 2. So that's revolution number 2. Revolution number 3, there's others, but because we only have 4 minutes, is a bit more subtle. And brings us back to Shema and Avtalion. Shema and Avtalion lived, as I mentioned, apparently, they're mentioned by Josephus. Shemaiah and Avtalion apparently lived at a time at the time, as I said, that the last Hasmonean king / high priest invited the Romans in to help him, and they sort of just took over and set him up as a puppet king. The rabbis remembered. Okay, the rabbis at that time, they tell the story about the relation of the Hyrcanus Aristobulus in a certain unique way. I don't go into it right now, but in rabbinic historical memory, they remembered that as a result of the events of the time, that there was some kind of edict or prohibition against learning Greek or Greek wisdom. Now, what's Greek wisdom and what's Greek? The upshot being that there were those who saw in the civil war, which took place between Hyrcanus Aristobulus, the last children of Shalom Tzana Malka and Alexander Yadnai, the last generation of Jewish independence before the Roman takeover, that somewhere along the line, we have to ban anything Greek. Now, you would ask yourself, whoa, wait a minute, hold on. We just had a whole war like that. If this took place in 63 BC, so like 100 years before that, or we haven't been through this already. There shouldn't be any Greek floating around. I would like to suggest that one implication of this story is that, at least the religious establishment in Eretz Israel, in Judea, we're still trying to figure out how to negotiate culturally between high culture, Greek high culture, Hellenistic culture, and Judaism. So that story tells us about a sort of a reaction to the fact that despite everything else, and there was not the victory, the reestablishment of the service of God in the temple, and the victory of the Maccabees didn't lead to a purging of everything from the outside world. We know the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans themselves, became very Hellenized, but there were plenty of indications that that perfectly Orthodox. I'm going to be anachronistic here. Orthodox rabbis were not 100% against things Greek. By the way, Avtalion is a Greek name, so you don't have to go that far. So the third revolutionary thing, I think, to raise, and I think maybe the one that's the most relevant, is the fact that and we're still dealing with this, that the question of how we encounter and interact with a larger, aggressively missionary civilization is a very, very important and very serious undertaking, which knows ups and downs, and which is an ongoing thing. So just as Hanukkah and its lessons is certainly has ramifications and implications and repercussions for today, the cultural issues that the encounter with Hellenism raised, including its extremes and the attempt to keep something in the middle, is also something which is case of what they call in French, plus ça change, plus ça reste la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So, Chanukah Sameach. We will continue next week with the observations of Avtalion. And in the meantime, I stand by my suggestion. No sufganiyot, yes spinach, more authentic, better for you. But whatever you do, stay healthy, stay well, and we'll see you next week.